So in this video, I'm going to be going through the loan application stage of my property journey with me as an example. I'll be going through exactly what the bank will require, what information they're going to ask for, what documents they're going to ask for, and so on. This video is part 7 of my property series. You can check out the previous parts in the description. Now, I haven't applied for a loan just yet because I'm still saving up for my deposit, but generally speaking, it is only a good idea to apply for a loan once you're seriously looking because the approval only lasts for 90 days. And after that 90-day period, you have to provide updated information. Anyways, let's jump into it. So this is one of the big 4 banks application form. You can see from the logo, this is NAB. I'm going to run through this very quickly to show you guys what the banks are going to be looking for. So we'll scroll down, and of course, the first questions they're going to ask is about the property itself, you know, what the numbers are, what they're looking like. So for myself, the purchase price is 400 grand. If you add in fees like stamp duty, buyer's agent costs, that is about 26K, including legal fees as well, with the total cost being 426K. Of course, my savings will then cover 66K of that, and then the loan is going to be 90% loan to value ratio. So the loan amount is going to be 360K, and that is the rough numbers. We'll scroll down, and if we have a look, the banks are going to ask for just rough information about yourself, like your name, date of birth, and so on and so on. We'll skip to some more details, like whether or not you're married, de facto, or single, dependents. These are any kids that you have that are under your care under the age of 18, contact details, email address, and so on and so on. Then of course you have the employment details, and this is very important because this is going to be obviously, you know, how are you going to pay off the loan? What sort of income do you have to service the loan? So for myself, I'm working full-time. You'll put in the employer's name, address. They're even asking for the employer's telephone number, which can seem a bit excessive. From my experience though, banks don't generally call the employer's telephone number unless it's a very rare circumstance or if they're trying to confirm something very niche or very specific. But if you've got a stable job, stable income, then it shouldn't really be too much of an issue. So personally, I wouldn't even put this on there, but yeah, there you go. You've got job title, industry, and so on. We'll scroll down and look at any other details like solicitor and conveyancer details. Now for myself, since I am buying a property, I will need to engage a solicitor or conveyancer, but at this stage, given that I'm still in the very early steps of the process and I haven't found a property, I can leave this blank. Moving on, of course, they're asking for any sort of judgments or bankruptcies that you've got. To be honest with you, they can find this information themselves as well from the credit score and the credit report itself, but they're asking for your input anyway, so yeah, you can answer that as well. We'll scroll down with details of the property. Now, given that I haven't actually found the property as yet, I can't actually put the address itself. Therefore, I've just left it as 1 TBA Street, and you can do that as well. It's not too big of an issue. We'll keep scrolling down on this application form, and then comes the other information, which is assets and liabilities. With assets, unfortunately, I don't have any property, so that's going to be blank. We're trying to change that. We've got the accounts, which currently I've got about 50K in my savings, so you can put that down. I don't have any cars, unfortunately, and other assets, which are shares and ETFs, which I've left the value blank because I'm not going to talk about that just yet. But we've got crypto as well, which is about 9K for myself, which I'm fully prepared to sell off to make up the deposit for this home loan. Then of course you have other assets like home contents, superannuation, and goodwill of your business if you have one. Moving on to liabilities, you've got of course home loans and investment loans. You've got line of credit facilities that have interest only repayments. You've also got any personal loans that you've got. I've got none of those, so I'm going to leave that blank. I do have one credit card, as we will go into further, which has a limit of 6K, so I'll put that down. And then my other debts, which are the investment loan, which I currently owe about 9.5K on, and the HEX debt, which is 15K, which I'm really hoping to pay off by the end of next year so I can get rid of it and my borrowing power can increase even further. Scrolling down a bit further, you've got the income side of things, which they're drilling down a bit more into. So on a monthly basis, your gross salary and your after-tax salary. I've got other income as well of dividends, distributions, and interest, but given that I'm not borrowing up to the absolute maximum, I'm going to leave that blank and go from there. You've got the expenses as well, which of course all banks are going to ask for this. This is very important, so make sure that you obviously declare this, and they may ask for reasoning as well as to why you've done it a certain way, or why an expense is low or high or whatever, so keep that in mind. We'll scroll down a bit more. You've got some important information about what they're going to do. They will be engaging credit reporting bodies as well. These are companies which keep track of your credit score. This is basically your consent that you're giving, that you're okay with them checking with a credit provider, so keep that in mind. and of course you can finish it off with signing and dating. So that was the application form. I know that this was extremely dry and the banks do love to ask for everything including your blood type, but that is just banks being banks. They're going to ask for as much information as they want, especially when it comes to the main information like your assets and liabilities, your income and expenses, your employment history, your personal details, and so on and so on. Now of course the banks can't just go off of what you tell them, otherwise we'd have another subprime mortgage crisis like we had 15 years ago. So to mitigate against that, there are lots of verifications and checks that the banks will do to make sure that the information that you're giving them is actually valid and actually makes sense. And sometimes banks can even find things that you haven't really thought of or even declared, like a credit card that you haven't used in a while that just sits there and things like that. So it's a good idea to not really hide things from the bank and to be very forthcoming. We'll get to that in a sec. Let's start off with the income side of things and look at what the banks will verify. So if you're like me and you're working a full-time job, the banks will likely be asking for your 2 most recent payslips. These payslips have to have your name on it, your pay, year to date, and things like that. The company that you're working for, the ABN as well. Some of the things that they'll be looking for are these, and the 2 payslips are there to verify your income, to make sure that the payslips match up, the numbers match up. These banks, they do use calculators and things like that, so if you're trying to fudge up the numbers, it's not really going to work. Now in my case, I only make a base salary and a bonus at the end of the year if I'm lucky, but for my application I've done the calculations and my base salary should be enough, so they'll only be looking at that to prove my income. I do of course have other sources of income like dividends and distributions from ETFs and interest as well from the savings that I've got, but of course I'm not going to borrow up to the absolute maximum. Therefore those income sources are just additional. They're not going to be required to be verified unless I'm borrowing up to the absolute max. Now because I'm buying an investment property, they can take into account any potential rent that I'll be getting as well, but how can they figure out the rent if I haven't actually bought the property yet? They'll be looking at the rental yields within the area that I'm looking for. They'll use a conservative estimate like 3% or 4% rental yield for the property value. So the property is worth 400 grand, then 3% of that or 4% of that is what they'll be using to conservatively calculate my income. Or I can go out and speak to a real estate agent that operates in that area. They can provide me with an appraisal of what the rent is likely to achieve in that area, and then the banks can use that as well. Let's move on to some of the admin things that they'll need. So the bank that I'm going to be applying for, I'm already a customer of that bank, so I don't really need to provide any ID, so that is all ticked off. I'm fully identified. Of course I'll also provide the application form, and then lastly bank statements if the banks require it, but generally speaking though, this depends on bank to bank. Some banks require bank statements of 3 months, some want 6 months, some don't want any. It just depends on the bank that you're going with, so do make sure you have a chat with your broker. But in general, if you already bank with the bank that you're applying for the loan, they'll be going through those statements anyways, so yeah, just keep that in mind. Let's move on to expenses and liabilities. Now as it stands currently, I only have 3 debts. I've got my HEX debt, which is my student loan for my university degree. I've got my credit card, and I've got my investment loan. For my HEX debt, they may ask for a statement that I can get from the ATO website to show that the HEX debt is existing, what the balance is, and so on. And then from there, they'll work out the rough repayments that I'll be making for that HEX debt based on my income, not the balance of the loan. For my credit card, they may ask for a recent statement that I've got to confirm the limit of the credit card, because that is what they'll base their calculations off of. If you've got a credit card that has a limit of 10K, but you're only using about $1,000 every month and you're paying it off in full, the banks will still be taking into account the 10K overall limit, because theoretically you could spend up to the 10K, you could max it out the next day, and so on. So they will be taking the conservative approach every single time. And of course, lastly, my investment loan, which I talked about extensively in this video right here, they may ask for a statement to confirm its details. These days, with how the loan applications work and where the banking system is generally heading towards, a lot of banks out there are sharing your information with credit bureaus. These are basically companies which keep track of your credit score. So if you do apply for a home loan, the bank will be checking with these credit bureaus to make sure that your credit score is okay. And on that credit report, there's a bunch of information and facilities that you have as well. Therefore, if the credit card which I've got, if I don't declare it, it will still be coming up on that credit report. So it's a good idea to not hide this information from the bank. So chances are, if you have a debt like a credit card, a personal loan, or a home loan, and you haven't declared it, it will be on that report and the banks can see it. There's a bunch of other information on there as well, like your employment history sometimes, your name change history, any directorships that you have, that you're a director of a company, things like that. So it's a good idea to be careful. In my case, I know for a fact that my credit card definitely shows up on my report, therefore I have no reason to hide anything in the first place anyway. After all of this information gathering, they're going to be doing an assessment based off of the numbers that you've provided. They'll do some calculations on the payslips, on the debt levels that you have. They'll plug those numbers into a servicing calculator, which will then spit out whether or not you can afford the loan. These are the quantitative factors, meaning these are the numbers of the application. Now, of course, they won't just be looking at the number side of things. They'll be looking at anything else that you told them about your job, about any expenses that you have coming up, any changes to your circumstances or your income in the future. And these are the qualitative factors. They'll look at these two things and then give you a credit decision, whether or not the loan is approved, declined, or needs more information. Now, with my scenario, given that I've worked in banking, I've done loans and so forth, I'm quite confident that, it should be okay. I don't really see any huge risks in my application, but hopefully it goes well. So that was the application process. I'm still a while away from applying for this application, but if you're a beginner, this is still very good to know. This was part 7. I'll see you guys in part 8. Bye now.